much thought do we give to the material we use every day? As an engineer, I naturally think a few more thoughts about materials. This sponge, for example, has very different properties than a rubber band, a porcelain plate, or a steel beam. One is soft, the other is hard. One can be stretched greatly under tension, the other not at all. And some materials can withstand strong pressure, while others cannot. This sponge, for example, it can be strongly deformed and it returns to its original state after deformation. This is the kind of resilience we hope for from many materials. They should go back to their initial state after being subjected to a load. As an engineer, I have a big heart for materials. So, in my studies, it was a big part of continuing education. Different plastics, different metals were in the foreground because they are very commonly used in industry. But already during my studies, I realized that such a study is not suitable for every student. Many have problems managing themselves. Many have dropped out of their studies or they changed their course of study. We humans like to choose the stressful situations that we can handle well. When the load becomes too much, we like to change the situation. When we expose ourselves to the stress, we can grow from it, but we can also damage ourselves. Sometimes it takes courage to escape the situation and look for something new. With materials, we engineers always look very critically at the stress situation and the capabilities of the material. We prepare material data sheets and get detailed information about the material and its properties. How much stress can it withstand? How much can I stretch or compress the material? How quickly does the material fatigue under certain load cycles? What load collectives is the material subjected to? Can the material be specially treated, perhaps with a hardening process to make it even more suitable for the load situation? So such a stress-strain hysteresis loop tells me how the material deforms under certain applied forces. When the material is subjected to a prolonged load, this hysteresis loop changes because the material changes its deformability over time. The word resilience originally comes from material physics, mechanical engineering. We engineers think a lot about resilience of materials, and all the materials we use are used according to German safety standards with a safety factor, so that they are appropriate for the load situation in any case. But what about human resilience? The resilience of individuals, teams and organizations that should and want to be able to act, even in critical situations. In my opinion, we look far too seldom at the nature of the different stress situations and even less at the characteristics and abilities of the people in the system. So many work situations are not necessarily coherent for the people who work in it. And because we humans are too often presented with work situations or feel forced to work in the situation, we unlearn to trust our feeling to choose the right work situations for ourselves, to choose challenges that fit our talent. In the last 18 years, I have had the opportunity to work in different projects. A few of them I was also allowed to lead. But have I led these projects resiliently? Have I led myself and my staff resiliently? Sometimes. Especially the first project at the university as a student and later as a PhD student were driven by great ignorance. I kept experiencing that I knew too little. I was solving problems that other people in the world had already solved, and I tried to solve problems that I failed miserably at. The feedback from many professors was, "Why don't you do that? It's a very simple project. But for us, it wasn't. Everything was new. The way of working, as well as the requirements and the knowledge that we needed to solve the problems. And sometimes we didn't just lack the knowledge, but also the right idea. I realized how difficult it is for many scientists and students to venture into these completely new waters. When there is no knowledge, or seemingly no one knows anything yet, it takes the right ideas for the right next steps. One feels one's way slowly to the hoped for results, and many attempts do not lead to the hoped for results, and one has to be satisfied with negative experimental results. So constant disappointments because another attempt did not work out were the order of the day. It took a lot of strength to keep setting out for new attempts and next steps. You have to manage yourself resiliently. Manage yourself while taking good care of yourself. It's when I discovered both the agile ways of working for my projects and the added value of coaching. I worked my way into many agile topics that kept reminding me of my training in Lean, in the Toyota production system, and I started training to become a coach. Coaching each other during the training helped me, and my growing experience in coaching helped my students. By moving into industry, I realized how different working conditions and stressful situations can be. The stress here was quite different. The projects I was leading were also a big burden here. However, this level of stress was due to the complex environment. Highly networked and dependent teams with a high level of bureaucracy, micropolitics, far too tight time frames and tight budgets. Many employees felt they had the responsibility but not the authority. Even I, as the project manager of a project, was in a situation where I had a lot of responsibility and I felt unable to act due to very little authority. I would never have chosen this situation for myself. If I had been asked to take the job, I would have said no. Not only did I, as the project manager, notice the stressful situation in my state of health, but the project staff were also regularly sick. For days, for weeks, for months, one employee even didn't come back. This was the time when I started studying psychology part-time to get even more into the psychology of workplace situations and especially resilience. More and more, I trained my senses for the signals of high or low resilience and stress in the workplace. I started to do research on resilience and to write some papers on the subject. This resulted in the Canossa model, which describes 7 impact factors of resilience in the project. I also published a resilience test for this. I will discuss the 7 factors of Canossa later. So, in the past year, 2020, this model was now in great demand. Corona created a lot of interest in what makes us resilient. Resilience was a theme in many places, and that is one of the positives that Corona brings. Of course, day after day, we see the negative side, but let's look at this one positive side. So Corona made us think again. So Corona made us care more about our health, look more at our resilience again. With the beginning of the Corona period, I started a study on resilience in the workplace under the new Corona conditions. Of particular interest to me was the change in factors from Canossa before, in, and of course after Corona. This I looked at in relations to the agile way of working in some workplaces. I asked myself whether employees and managers perceived and evaluated their resilience factors differently before Corona and during Corona. And yes, there was a big difference among some employees and managers. Of course, there were also many who perceived no change in their resilience factors. For me, the reason and cause were particularly interesting. And this was in relation to agile ways of working. I interviewed a number of colleagues who said that agile ways of working had made them work so well together before that they now don't need to make changes in Corona time. And others described relying more on agile practices now. In my current position as an agile coach and responsible for agile transformation in a large corporation, I noticed the high demand for agile practices. In the past year, the demand for training and consulting in Scrum, Kanban, open space technology, facilitation of workshops, and especially retrospectives, as well as facilitation of online events, has increased significantly. Likewise, many more executives are dealing with virtual teams, new scaled agile teams, and mobile work. The organizational structure might look quite different in the future after all. Thoughts that were very rarely and very hesitantly discussed in a year ago. So we can see that there is a lot going on in the organization right now. As an engineer, I would say the material is hot and therefore currently easier to form. I have now distributed questionnaires at different times over the last 2 years. And especially in the last year, I have increasingly asked about possible agile ways of working in team leadership and project execution. By the way, here is the QR code of the questionnaire. I would like to share some results and findings as well as assumptions with you in my presentation. I will publish the exact results and statistical analysis after Corona. So as long as we are still in the pandemic, you can still participate. Okay. So I would like to start by looking at the various stress situations with you. We take a mountain as a metaphor for this. We look at our typical work situations and project situations like sections of the mountain that we want to climb. So first, it's always good to build a base. To set a camp by being at home for at least a while. I would like to compare this to our everyday situations at work. There is always a lot to do on a daily basis. So logging onto the computer in the morning, answering emails, sorting documents, having a coffee together with colleagues, taking care of food, working on simple tasks, and so on. At their tent in their warehouse, where are always similar routine tasks, and for many simply spending some relaxed time here is enough. They like to occupy themselves with the routine tasks, but even here a high level of stress can occur when the simple routine tasks become too much. The feeling of being trapped in the tent and the longing to do something other than spending time in camp and make for a feeling of strain. Some feel the desire to conquer the mountain. There are several possibilities here. So for some, it is enough to walk the paved ways and take the offered cable cars to described viewing platforms, and others would prefer to walk unknown paths to new unknown corners of the mountain, or they even want to climb to the top of the mountain. So many want to have a little bit of everything in different mixes. So for paved trails and zip lines, we rely on the experts to provide us with their best practices for the mountain. They've mastered the complicated parts of the mountain and leveled it for us. So when I want to get to a certain place here, I pick an expert or the appropriate technique that will get me to where I want to go. So with an analysis of the map and the range of subject matter experts and technology, so I quickly find the appropriate support to get to my destination. In these situations, I can plan well, but even here, stressful situations are more common. So let's stay with the metaphor of the mountain. If the expert is missing, or the cable car is at a standstill, or the viewing platform is closed, then I cannot implement my plan as planned. So stress and arguments in the group about who prefers which route, which options for implementation also lead to stress. So if I don't have enough money for the cable car, I also can't get to my destination. I can't get to my destination. So this means that even in projects where I bring the expertise and technology, problems can arise. Classic project management is on such stress situation. And we have a third type of stress, the journey to others as yet unknown spots on the mountain. So the journey to the places where there are no paved paths, no cable car yet, and the mountain, there are only few people. So here too we can take it to a mountaineer who has a talent for these ventures, but even this climber does not know all the corners of the mountain, and he knows how unpredictable a mountain is. So one feels one's way small steps, turns around something and strikes new paths. So the type of load in this case is completely different again. Here it depends on ideas, on talent, and people have to be well prepared for this climb and physically fit actually. And then there is the fourth project situation, the moment when the fog rolls in on the mountain. In these situations, every climber advises to get to safety and minimize risks. So the situation is not controllable. So just as you will experience something of each of these situations on your trip to the mountains, in every project and in every work situation, various of these forms of work and stress can occur together and in different proportions. For the more unfamiliar part of the mountain, for the complex situations, iterative learning ways of working are appropriate. For situations in which fog rolls in, good crisis management is needed. Especially in the Corona period, it was highly exciting to observe how different teams deal with the stress situation and, above all, how managers lead through these situations. In many specialist books on the subject of leadership, one finds the models that managers should lead their employees according to their abilities, skills, and the current situation. But what if the situation is unknown to everyone overnight? And no one has skills and abilities to deal with the Corona pandemic. So as a leader, it was important not to lose your head here yourself. Above all, to lead yourself well and resiliently. Part of leadership then, and still today, was to create a safe framework and avoid risk. Many leaders therefore send their employees to the home office when possible. So all they created are the safeguards to protect their employees. For a moment, meeting deadlines and processes was no longer a priority. In many companies, that moment continues today because the Corona pandemic is not yet over. So in the last few months, you could see outstanding leadership in some places. It was, to me, an example of resilient leadership. From my observations and interviews, 3 different leadership directions stood out. So first, the employees were no longer needed in one area and were assigned to another area. Second, the employees came up with new product ideas that the market needed in that moment. And third, the employees were themselves were given the task of creating framework conditions in which they could work. So these 3 directions are not fundamentally new, but it was very impressive how some managers and their teams managed to implement this in just a few days. So many told me that these huge adjustments to the situation would normally have taken months or even years. However, when the situation ended abruptly, these leaders managed to remain capable of acting and reinventing themselves and their team. So, a few real-world examples. So, to 1, employees were no longer needed in their previous area and were assigned to another area. So, it resulted in many restaurants and retail closing for lockdown. Employees who previously supported this area were hardly getting any more orders or work assignments. So some managers reacted quickly and they managed to place their employees where employees were now needed. So even with colleagues of mine, some employees who were previously implementing IT for warehouses or retail sales floors were moved to other teams. The main success factor here was that the higher demand in IT for healthcare and other areas was made transparent. And a different, more focused way of working allowed employees to quickly become work ready. So the most popular public example, McDonald's merges with Aldi and gives employees to supermarkets. Let's see example 2. Employees came up with a new product idea that the market needed. So in sales, training and consulting, they had to act quickly at the beginning of the lockdown. Travel was no longer an option and a concept had to be proposed as quickly as possible to implement everything online. So such a change would usually have taken years, but now it was possible to approach customers even with immature ideas and propose virtual products. So some executives and their teams had their ears so close to the market and so close to the customer that they quickly understood what the market needed now. Normally, new products take a long time to get to the market because they have to go through some cycles and processes. However, for lockdown, some new products were released in a very fast time. A popular example of the public. So, a coffee filter manufacturer, Melitta from Germany. It switched to producing protective masks in a very short time, and honestly, they already look like coffee filters, don't they? Actually, the employees themselves were tasked with created conditions in which they could work. That was example number 3. So under the corona requirements, some teams had to change their working conditions and the offices could not longer be used with these restrictions and the collaboration in spaces was not possible. A colleague told me how they had managed to move their call center agents from large office spaces to home office within a few weeks only. That had seemed impossible for years. Due to safety regulations and policies, it was possible. Many managers had resisted this years because they believed employees would not work properly from home without supervision. It takes a big change of heart, a lot of courage, or a situation where it is no other way to implement this change. Now, when it was even reported in the newspaper that call centers from the home office report much higher performance and less abstinence, could deny it, the leaders couldn't deny that it works. So Corona let us go. And even if they had previously vehemently denied it. So if we look at the examples from our company or from the public, we recognize the resilience factors according to Canossa here. I have now made you wait long enough, so let's take a look at the 7 Canossa factors here. So as we go through one factor after the other, feel free to reflect on your personal work situation. I will also keep referring back to Agile approaches, which were mentioned in my study in the interviews as being very conducive and supportive. So C, coherence. Coherence has long been considered one of the most important factors for resilience. So Antonovsky already presented the sense of coherence as an elementary factor. He explained that it is a kind of basic trust. the feeling of being a cogwheel in the great gears of the organization, essential and effective in driving everything forward. So Antonovsky sees three key aspects in coherence. So understandability, the ability to perceive situations in life as coherent and comprehensible. And the manageability, the ability to shape situations oneself and also to have confidence in being able to shape the situation oneself. And the meaningfulness, the belief that life and the daily actions in it make sense. So especially in the Corona period, many felt they did not have enough resources and skills. They lost their sense of self-efficacy and felt externally determined by external decisions and circumstances. So teams that had a high coherence value before and during the crisis or developed it through Corona were concerned with understandability and manageability. In these teams, there was a very high level of transparency from leaders about everything that was discussed and implemented at different levels in management and in the team. So some teams with high coherence scores reported using OKRs, so objectives and key results. Through this practice, they had transparency about how their goals related to other team goals, and management's goals. The changes in management goals and due to Corona were also immediately evident in the team's goals. So by adjusting goals in short cycles, teams were able to respond quickly to the changing situations. The teams that applied the concept of flight levels according to Klaus Leopold also spoke about a high level of comprehensibility and meaningfulness. They made the work steps manageable through small steps and tight division. Every employee had the feeling at all times that he or she was contributed something essential to the company's success. The teams that were offered large group events by their managers also spoke of a high level of coherence. Here, the managers allowed the employees to set up communities on different topics or to offer open exchange rounds. Some also designed open space events with their manager. Here, employees were allowed to set the agenda themselves. At the beginning, employees and managers are allowed to name topics that are discussed and worked on a large agenda wall at different times in different rooms. Everyone is free to decide where they want to go and participate at any time. So these events gave employees a great sense of manageability and the interrelationships with the company. Okay, let's look at the second factor, A, acceptance. So acceptance is accepting a situation like Corona is difficult for all of us. So some can quickly delineate where they can make a difference themselves and where they need to accept the situation and learn to deal with it. Just distinguishing one from the other is often difficult. There are those who quickly perceive themselves as victims, go into a passive posture and do nothing. There are those who try to save everything and still fight, even if they have little chance. And of course, there are also those who blame others and consider the situation to be solved by those who also let it arise. So in Agile teams, I found that it was the regular retrospective that helped the team and the leader to accept the situation. The team was able to accept situations and conditions whose logical course or reason could not be identified and could not be changed more quickly than others. So here, the manager in particular also ensured that the business theater was reflected on, together every now and then. So they looked at the typical processes and habits and the company, as well as the beliefs that were in many employees' heads from a meta perspective. They put on different glasses every now and then and looked at the situation through different filters. So how would our customer describe the situation? What would another team say about it? If we brought in an outside consultant, what would their opinion be? And if our grandma were observing the situation, what advice would she gave us? So this also allows the teams to see the good sides alongside all the bad sides in the current stressful situation. And the third factor is network. So in stressful situations, it is good to have a resilient network to fall back on. Managers who are well networked within the company and can also draw on experts and friends outside the company have a higher level of resilience. In traditional corporate structures, there are often long lines of communication to be able to discuss individual issues with the relevant managers or subject matter experts. So, however, if the network is well developed, shorter communication channels can be used in critical situations. So, in some companies, this is done informally. Others have intentionally aligned their organization according to short communication channels along the value chain. So the teams that reported having a good network attributed this primarily to the executives' network. So if the leader was well networked within the company, this had an impact on the team. So of course, individual team members were also well connected in the company, in part because they maintained their network regularly. But the leaders who placed value on their team members sharing information with other departments and other teams scored high on this resilience factor. So they supported working in communities, educating expert groups, holding information sessions, and having lunch and coffee breaks with colleagues. And in the Corona period, some teams were able to draw on established crisis teams or their local heroes, so which they had previously established. So in some teams, leaders had used special methods to visualize current resources and networks. They created a picture of all points of contact and networks and with their staff and drew communication paths and decision paths into a sociogram. They drew on who all was in their network and where communication paths and decision paths ran. So thicker lines in the picture embodied stronger communication, and thicker outlines around people or groups embodied stronger decision-making authority. So especially from the home office, they then realized who they needed to stay in conversation with, even while in the home office. So here it was painted on which contacts had become worse by Corona in order to strengthen these again explicitly. Those who had already established formats for collegial consultation noticed their value, especially during the Corona crisis. And others designed new formats to introduce collegial consultations during the Corona crisis. The next factor is optimism. Optimism does not mean, of course, that one should see everything only positively. Weighing things up is especially important here. So weighing up between the optimist, the pessimist, and the realist. It is about realistic expectations of the future and not about unworldly fantasies of the future. So Martin Seligman and his students have already found out that we humans attribute much more value to negative things than to positive things. So some teams are particularly happy to report on negative things because they feel that this information is particularly valuable. But especially when we talk primarily about negative things in departmental meetings and project discussions, we have an even stronger feeling that everything is going badly. So the positive is then forgotten even more. So talking about positive things 3 times as much as talking about negative things makes for a neutral assessment of the situation overall. Agile teams had established methods in their teams to maintain a healthy optimism. It ensures a good positive assessment of success with their forecasts, such as throughput measurement and burn down charts, or they established a stop sign to avoid getting stuck too long in negative discussions that led nowhere. So, for example, a chart with ELMO that stands for enough, let's move on. And yes, that is also the dear red friend from Sesame Street. So when someone shows this card up, the topic is changed as quickly as possible. So next, self-perception, S. So how does the team actually perceive itself? To a large extent, it depends on how they talk about themselves and how others talk about the team. So leaders have a big influence here. If they talk mostly negatively about the project or the team, it has a strong impact on the project or the team. When a problem arises, it is never the fault of just one person or one team, because every one team operates in the whole environment, and there are always numerous dependencies and framework conditions that have contributed to the problem or error. So each person and each situation can always be perceived quite differently. Everybody himself gives things their meaning. So what is of immense importance for one person is not important at all for another, and a few weeks later it may not be important to anyone. So how we talk about things, and especially how we talk about ourselves, determines how we act. So self-awareness also includes regularly reflecting on the language you use and the metaphors you use to describe issues. Is the team incompetent? Can't anything be done about it anywhere? Has it always been done this way? Is it all only possible if another team would fulfill wishes? And couldn't anything be done? Do we need money? Is the project compared with the Basel ship or with the Titanic, or the colleagues with soldiers at the front? Or are you fighting against windmills again? And all these sentences express how they perceive themselves and how their team members perceive themselves. So teams that regularly reflect on that words they use and how they talk about themselves and others receive higher resilience scores. So leaders pay attention to how their team expresses themselves as well as how they express themselves. So they regularly seek feedback from other leaders so they can place their self-perception alongside others' perceptions. Let's have a closer look at self-regulation. So how often does the situation explode? How often do situations arise where employees lose self-control? So resilience also means developing a positive self-efficacy expectation. So you expect yourself to be effective. You get this expectation when you master difficult situations, learn from other models by observing them, get social support in doing so, and can control your own physiological reactions. All of these take time and practice. So if I don't practice and learn constantly, my field of action is very small. And it takes practice and new tasks every now and then that I approach to get out of my comfort zone. I have to set myself new tasks again and again. And people who have to work in very complex, surprising, unstable situations and environments invest a lot in their own training. So athletes or firefighters, for example, both invest a lot in the technical acquisition phase. So they practice situations regularly and acquire strategies and simple work procedures. So they do this so that the simplest work processes are internalized or competition in the field. And they have various operational tactics and supporting strategies, and they can rely on their talent in their field, in that action. So in my survey, it is already apparent, and the teams and the leaders who are learning a lot have been particularly strong. And the teams plan small experiments, they try new things, they think their way into different situations and think them through. And for example, they think, so what if? And they playfully consider possible outcomes. Some teams also incorporate role-playing into their mutual development. So they also take on each other's roles to learn new topics and look at work from a different perspective. And leaders who regularly invest in their training, read books, go to conferences like this, and take time for self-reflection, develop high resilience factors here. So A for alignment. The alignment of leaders contributes significantly to their own resilience, but also the resilience of their employees. So when they have clarified for themselves what gives the meaning as a leader and as a co-creator of work, they are resilient in critical situations. So according to Viktor Frankl, it gives us meaning when we are allowed to create something, experience something, or we are allowed to stand for something. So when it comes to alignment, each individual brings their own personal goals. Alongside or opposite of these are the team goals, the customer goals, and the organization's goals. So to give teams good alignment, the leader should do good storytelling. Stories in particular convey more strongly than anything else exactly what is to be achieved. If the leader clearly communicates the what, the team can quite autonomously take care of the implementation, the how. It is precisely this clear communication of the what by the leader that creates greater autonomy in the team and thus more self-organization. So especially in complex environments, the leader cannot make all the decisions himself and provide all the people with tasks individually. Think back on the mountain climb to new unknown spots of the mountain. Here you need clear principles on how you want to behave while climbing the mountain. The mountain guide cannot always tell every single climber where to put the next step and explain every single move. So it needs clear announcements by the mountain guide, clear principles, and an orientation of the whole group towards the next stage goal. So to clarify the principles in the team, you can ask how you want to talk about this mountain climb after the experience. What is important to you in this joint project? So in exactly the same way, one can ask in the project, so how should we talk about us and the project after the project? And answers lead to principles that help align the team and take the pressure of the leader. So how can I achieve greater resilience in myself as a leader and in my team? First of all, it must be my own decision to do something for my resilience. If I am forced to apply the individual methods or to take a closer look at the topic of resilience, it will not be successful in the long term. So real change needs voluntariness. So it needs one's own decision, the clear yes to set out on the path. So it needs an invitation. And invitations invite us to deal intensively with a topic or a task. Whether it's an invitation to a wedding, an invitation to a game night, an invitation to a meeting, or an invitation to join a project. So as soon I'm invited, I have to intensively without whether or not I want to accept this invitation. And this inner process creates a high level of commitment in the employee. If this employee accepts the invitation, he or she has voluntarily decided to participate. So this voluntariness comes with an inner motivation. And it is precisely this that leads to greater commitment. The employee now wants to be allowed to contribute her or his potential. And this is described by Daniel Mezick in Inviting Leadership Approach. So a good invitation always has a clear description of the goal, the rules of the game. You can see the progress, and it is voluntary. So good games have exactly these 4 criteria as well. So Professor Jane McGonigal describes these 4 factors as essential to really, really good, addictive games. So we like to play games when the goal of the game is attractive to us. For some, that's soccer. For others, it's Monopoly. We like to play games when we know the rules of the game, and we like the rules of the game. And we don't like to play a game that feels like a Sisyphean work with no progress that shows up for all. And we want to notice the progress, and we don't want to be forced to participate in the game. It's the same with invitations. It's opt-in. So especially in the Corona time, we realized how effective invitations are. Managers have been transparent about the situation. They invited their employees to change their area and to contribute elsewhere. They invited their employees to develop new product ideas. They invited their employees to create suitable conditions for themselves. So these invitations to participate have even been the cause of the success. So many managers told their employees that they would now be assigned elsewhere, that they would have to develop new product ideas, and that new framework conditions would be created. But there is a big difference between inviting employees to co-design and presenting them with a fait accompli. So do employees have the opportunity to decline this invitation? What are the consequences if employers do not accept advice from the manager? What are the consequences if employees do not want to play by the rules? So a good invitation is made without power. Employees follow the manager because the manager formulates a good invitation, and employees want to follow voluntarily. So they do so because the employees perceive the leader as competent, and the leader offers them guidance. With this kind of inviting leadership, we have already moved a lot in the history of mankind. So great civic movements were mostly led by those who did not lead through power, but with their idea and invitation moved others to follow them. So many of them, like Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi, were said to have been offered political offices and positions of power that they refused. So they wanted people to follow them because they wanted to follow completely voluntarily, and not because they had to follow. So we can see what a good invitation does in the many social media invitations that receive a flood of response. So starting from influencers to various conferences and meetups, invitations to mass movements and demonstrations. So within the last year, there has been the biggest increase in monthly active users of social networks. So in January 2021, the number increased from 4.2 billion. This is 13% more than last year. And yeah, it makes it all more connected, more complex, more unpredictable. And these resonances have a big effect. And it is an importance to practice using invitations that have these 4 elements, like a clear goal, appropriate rules for the game, regular feedback on progress, and the voluntariness. Opt-in participation. So whenever invite people to meetings, trainings, coachings, to open space event, to conferences, take on a task, to participate in a project, or to help shape the company, then ask for these 4 things and get the invitation recognizable. So good invitations accept they are interesting for the invitee. So they weigh the pros and cons, and they consider whether they want to take on the responsibility. And he or she considers whether they have the skills and the authority. And they may decline the invitations, but this is transparency. This is important information that we need to make even better invitations. And Daniel Mezick always likes to say, and what if no one accepts the invitation? Yeah, that's data. The feeling of security already starts with the executive. If the manager feels a high level of insecurity in the situation, he or she needs a lot of inner strength to express a feeling of security to his or her employees. So creating a safe framework requires a lot of inner strength. The framework should be able to be spread over the employees like a protective umbrella. If you want to change something about the situation, you need a protective umbrella. So no matter if you want to lead your team to new ways of working, to new products, or to new tasks, they won't succeed without a shelter. So Corona has managed to create exactly the conditions that such a protective umbrella creates in many companies. And suddenly things were possible that were otherwise considered impossible. So even if the usual practices in the company speaks against the change, even when the culture of the company speaks against the change, it was possible through Corona. Normally the company's immune system likes to strike. So change is talked away either in its introduction or stopped after a short time. So sometimes in this only introduced superficially and in secret the old behavior continues. A protective screen creates a protective umbrella. It creates a frame where you can do it. And from the protective space around your hypotheses, we believe new product X or the new way of working Y or the new areas that are a solution for A, B, or C. And it's important to take some time to clarify your goals. Through which change would you like to achieve which goal, and would you determine the positive impact of their improvement? Can you name an external reference? It's better to be able to pin down the improvement through an evaluation from strangers or thought metrics from the market or customers than through your own internal metrics. So look outside the box and see what's the customer and the market have to say about it. So create an exceptional situation for the shelter. Different rules apply here than in ordinary day-to-day business. So for example, team utilization is not measured here, or there are no annual targets per person but only per team, and perhaps individual process steps do not apply here, and perhaps the team is given more personal responsibility and more authority. So for such a protective umbrella, you need a shelter founder. Someone who has enough authority to design and maintain a protective space. So when I used to come up with proposals like that, I was told we can't do that because we have to comply with regulations. We can't do that because we are a service center. Our management doesn't want that, but yeah, these excuses no longer count, because we have seen that Corona has made many things possible that previously seemed impossible. And Corona has just put up this protective umbrella. And leaders who can put up this protective umbrella can bring about real change. And of course, it needs to be voluntary. We've already talked about that. And then it's good if the situation is there full time. Corona is there full time. There's never a moment when Corona is not there. It's a situation that makes sure that we have to acquire things, that we have to learn, that we have to adapt to the situation, that we have to become creative and innovative. And then it needs a temporary framework. Corona is there full time, but it will also be over at some point. So after the pandemic, we will think about which changes we want to maintain now. It makes perfect sense to set a time and end point for all the changes you introduce in the company. So at this point, or even a little before, you can decide what to keep and what to change. In the same way, change needs boundaries. So boundaries within which we can act. No limits that are too wide, in which we lose ourselves, because then we can't orient ourselves and chaos arises. If theoretically everything is possible and nobody gives a direction or intention, no creative solution emerges. So creativity and innovation needs boundaries. So only when different things don't work, some things are not available, and tricky puzzles arise, do we become creative and innovative. So, of course, these limits should not be too narrow either, because in too narrow limits, we can't become creative and innovative either. So then we feel constrained and unable to act. So all employees in the company are adults who bring a great deal of knowledge and competence with them. These employees can decide for themselves which people they want to follow. So who can be a team founder? Someone who leads the group up to the mountain, so as a mountain guide. But everyone walks themselves, everyone puts one foot in front of the other. And yeah, we have created so many boundaries and regulations and principles in companies to keep everything in place that we now treat our employees like children. So during Corona, many employees have been allowed to solve problems like adults again. And yeah, it doesn't take managers in many places to keep everything in place. It doesn't need these many small-scale control systems. So Corona managed to make the situation very transparent. It was clear to everyone that what needed to be done. And the more the leaders clearly presented what conditions and what challenges were currently facing the company, the better all employees were able to respond to the situation together. And Corona created a protective umbrella in which rules and processes were allowed to be circumvented or reinvented. And everything that happened under the umbrella was allowed to be communicated transparently. So if we are allowed to talk freely about the special regulations and simplified processes, then the sponsor of the umbrella has created a really, really good umbrella. And if you are allowed to talk about it, please do so whenever possible. Let others share in it. Let others learn from your experiences. So sharing is caring. So I would like to invite you to take on one or two thoughts from this talk and talk about it with others. And think of the red sponge in stress situations for the person. Think of the mountain to distinguish different stress situations. Invite your employees to choose the situation they feel resilient and talented enough for. Formulate good invitations with voluntariness so that their employees can bring genuine commitment and potential. And reflect as a leader and as a team on how strong your Canossa resilience factors are. Make it a sport for yourself and as a team to do something about your and their resilience. So integrate agile practices into your work to build resilience and vice versa. So create and work under good umbrellas to create real change. Make what you do transparent so others can learn from you and be inspired to venture similar. So I myself post news regularly on different channels. I'm happy if you follow me and we stay in conversation on these topics, and I look forward to the exchange. So what has inspired you? What ideas would you like to implement soon? What is resilient leadership for you? How can you lead yourself and your team strongly? So thank you very much for joining.